Hello there. So it's only been a couple of days since my last video, but I wanted to, post another one on kind of a different topic. It turns out the area where I live in Washington State is now officially kind of an epicenter for the coronavirus, officially named COVID-19 outbreak. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Um, okay, now what happened? The coronavirus, was first detected in China. It's thought to have been about the middle of November 2019, and the first case in the U.S. was identified in a person who had recently returned um, from China to Washington State, was diagnosed, hospitalized, quarantined, recovered, was asked to self-quarantine a while longer at home, and now is completely recovered. Um, so that was it in this area for quite a while. Then the last few days, several other cases have been identified. I think the number, it keeps changing almost hourly, but as of this morning, it was like 13 cases in Washington State. And unfortunately, 6 of those people have died. Now, it turns out that this disease is most dangerous if you're older and if you have other underlying health conditions. Now, unfortunately for me, I do have a couple other health conditions, but so far I'm doing fine, and trying to be prudent about hand washing and other reasonable measures to avoid exposure. Now, what appears to have happened based on analysis of the genetics of the virus. It turns out you can do genetic sequencing of viruses, and they mutate over time, so you can see how close the virus in one patient is to what was detected in another patient, and see if the patients seem to be in the same line of transmission, or got it through different avenues. So far, there are several cases in this area and also in Northern California, which coincidentally is where the Air Force Base, where a number of U.S. evacuees from China were flown and quarantined. And in both cases, they found people in the general population who hadn't traveled, hadn't had any known contact with anyone who'd traveled, but nevertheless tested positive for the virus, and in some cases, have symptoms. So the question is, how did they get it? Well, the analysis of one of the what's called community transmission patients detected recently in Washington showed that the genetics of the virus was almost identical to the first patient who was diagnosed here, who'd returned from China in mid-January. So I'll say that this is not proven, but it's been hypothesized by some researchers, and seems plausible, and people are gathering data to see if this is borne out, that the person may have infected other people who maybe either didn't have symptoms or had symptoms so mild that it wasn't really recognized as COVID-19, and then a chain of transmission started from that. So how many people have it in this area? Well, we don't know. One of the problems is that up until last week, the only people tested were people who had recently traveled to an affected region or who had been in close proximity to people who had traveled to an affected region. So, people in the general population who may have picked it up through, somewhere that we don't know about, weren't eligible for testing, so they weren't tested, so they weren't diagnosed, so we didn't think they existed. Um, that's now been, proven false, both in Washington and in California. Um, the estimates from some researchers is that there's maybe a few hundred people which are affected in my vicinity. We don't know. That has a really large uncertainty depending on how you do the calculation. It could be anywhere from 20 to 1,500. Okay, that's we need more data to get a better understanding. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, what it means is it's worth doing prudent things, washing your hands thoroughly, particularly if you've been touching things like doorknobs, elevator buttons, other things where many other people have been touching. Don't touch your face, don't eat food until you've washed your hands. Kind of like the good advice that your mom probably told you when you were a little kid. Um, and then there is kind of an advice against avoiding large gatherings, and if you are in a large gathering, it turns out I'm scheduled to go to a scientific conference next week. It's fine to just wave to people. You don't need to shake their hand. You don't need to, do the, European, kissing on the cheek. Hopefully everyone will understand that you're trying to protect yourself and them from any transmission. So what is happening is now that we're testing more widely and realize that there are cases of community transmission, the number is going to go up substantially. That doesn't mean that way more people are getting affected. They were probably already affected. We just hadn't tested them, so we didn't know about them. The other thing, this is partly speculation from researchers and partly my own guess, is that I think in a lot of cases this virus does not cause severe symptoms. It seems to cause severe symptoms in people who are older and have underlying health issues. Many people probably have the virus and have no recognizable symptoms. So it's probably much more common than people realize, but it's the fatality rate is probably much lower than people realize. But if you are in regular contact with someone who is older or has an underlying health issue, think very carefully on how you can minimize exposing them if you happen to pick it up, because you might not even know it. So anyway, it's it's a thing. It's something we need to pay attention to. It's not something that we need to panic about or that it's helpful to panic about. So anyway, be well, all of you, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.